Welcome back to the React Roundup podcast. I'm Jack Carrington. I'll be your host for today. And with me is my esteemed panel, Paige Niederinghouse.
Hey, everyone.
And TJ Van Tol.
Hey, everybody.
And today we have a special guest. We've got Sebastien Lorber. Hey, Sebastien, how are you?
Hey, I'm fine, and you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Hey, folks, this is Charles Maxwood. I've been talking to a whole bunch of people that want to update their resume and find a better job. And I figure, well, why not just share my resume? So if you go to topenddevs.com/resume, enter your name and email address, then you'll get a copy of the resume that I use, that I've used through freelancing, through most of my career, as I've kind of refined it and tweaked it to get me the jobs that I want. Like I said, topenddevs.com/resume will get you that. And you can just kind of use the formatting. It comes in Word and Pages formats, and you can just fill it in from there.
So why don't you give us a little talk about why you're famous? Like to ask that question?
I don't know if I'm famous, but
everybody says that.
You probably heard about maybe my newsletter This Week in React, maybe the Docusaurus project, which is the static site generator that Facebook is developing and using on many documentation websites that you browse on a regular basis, I think. So I think that's all.
All right. You mentioned we might want to talk about React 18 this morning, and I'm curious about it myself. So what do you see as the big wins on React 18?
I think the big wins, actually, we don't yet see the big wins because somehow it lays the foundations for some future improvements, but we are only scratching the surface of what is possible with the concurrent features. And I think something that I'm very excited about is all the things like, there is an off-screen API that they are working on so that you can, for example, move your browser history forward and then go back. And then it's quite instantaneous because somehow there are two virtual DOMs being available in parallel. So React doesn't have to re-render the previous screen. And this also enables the door to predictive rendering, like maybe you can start rendering the next screen while you are hovering a link on the previous page, for example, so that when you click on the link, it can be instantaneous. So these are quite far-fetched advanced use case, but I think it's quite interesting. And the thing is, React is criticized for having a virtual DOM these days. There are a lot of alternatives that are reactive, like Solid and Project Signals and things like that. But I think there is a cost to being based on a virtual DOM, and React has decided to pay it. And we don't see yet the benefits of paying that cost. So the other frameworks look more appealing, but it's only getting started for React somehow, I think.
Yeah, I'd actually not heard of the predictive modeling stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Like, what's the feature? What can we look up to find out more about this?
I think it was in the release blog post of the React 18 release blog post. There were mention of some of the features that I talked about, like the off-screen API and things like that. But I think it's this kind of predictive rendering was already in Gatsby, for example. There was a plugin that was using something like, I think there is a package called Guess.js or something like that, which reads your Google history, your Google Analytics history of your website, and then is able to predict based on where you are, which are the links that you are likely to click, and then it can prefetch the resource, but only for the links that you are the most likely to.
That is freaking amazing.
Navigate.
Wow.
Yeah. This is a bit crazy, but I mean, it's a bit quite far-fetched to do this on your website, maybe, but I think it's interesting because, if you can make the click instantaneous, it's still quite interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The Gatsby plugin I don't think is very well known, and I don't even know if it's even very used, but I think it's better to predict, for example, if you hover a link that you will eventually click on it because it's likely to happen. Maybe using a Google Analytics is a bit too far to do this.
I think it's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're tracking so much of what users are doing online anyway, with or without their explicit knowledge. It seems like a natural next step for a lot of websites.
Yeah.
yeah, if you're tracking everything anyways, you might as well give the user some benefit
Give them a faster
from
site.
doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
So Sebastien, one of the questions that I have, and maybe you could give us some more insight, are there were a bunch of new hooks that were released with React 18. Could you give us some ideas of what those hooks, what benefits they provide from, we know that there's the use state, use effect, use ref, things like that have been out for a while, but what are the new hooks trying to fill in the gaps for?
Yeah, so I think some of the new hooks permits to enable the concurrent features of React. For example, there is a use transition and use deferred and things like that permits to start a transition, maybe create some low priority updates and high priority updates in different callbacks so that you can see on the screen, see things being updated on the screen at the right time without blocking too much the main thread. So this is quite interesting, for example, for updates like that can take a long time to update on the screen. For example, if you have a search engine on your front end with, an autocomplete with a very long list of possible matches, and then if you type some characters in an input, then it takes a lot of time to find all the possible suggestions. So maybe you will schedule the urgent update, like when you press on a keystroke, then it updates immediately the input. You want this to happen immediately because this is user feedback that is important for the UX. But at the same time, you don't want to delay the displaying of the suggestions for the autocomplete. So you will schedule a transition so that this update is displayed in a lower priorities. So you don't block the main thread and you don't prevent the UX to remain snappy when the user is interacting with the UI. And also there is using this external store that we discussed about previously is which permits to somehow subscribe to an external store, which is quite an abstract concept. And I think it's a bit misunderstood in the community because people think it's just about state managers. So, for example, you know that there is Redux and Zustand and all the state managers in React that somehow implement this, are using this hook now, so that it permits to synchronize with somehow a singleton containing your store, your data, and injecting your data into the view in a performant way and in a way that is safe with concurrent React features. But at the same time, there is something that is not very widely known, is that there are a lot of external sources that you can subscribe to. And I think, for example, there are a lot of browser APIs. For example, you want to know if the browser, if your new is in an active state, if your window is in an active state, you can subscribe to that. Basically, every API where there is a DOM event being sent can be a source for an external store, can be considered somehow an external store. For example, your URL state of your browser can be considered as an external store, and you can subscribe to some slices of this store. And it's also available, for example, with React Native. For example, there are a lot of APIs on which you can ask if your app is in an active state, or if this screen is displayed, or if this screen has the focus. This can be wired to the use sync in external store. So it's not just state management. It's also, I think, also many other sources that you don't necessarily think of intuitively because it's not yet widely used in the React ecosystem. But I think it's a valuable hook that we should use more often.
Yeah, I love that hook.
Yeah. That's funny because I published an article just at the same time that you released the video about it. So, yeah. That's
Great
hopefully
minds.
they both did well because, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if, maybe there is the use ID hook also, but I think it's a bit less interesting. It's mostly to have the same ID on the server and then the client because it was a bit complex to implement in userland. But apart accessibility features and things like that, maybe there's less exciting new things that we can do with this one.
Well, it's cool to see the frameworks paying off React 18. Next.js 13 and Remix, actually. I've been talking a lot to Jacob Ebby, and Remix has a new deferred system that's coming out that's going to be fascinating. But to see how they're doing React server components and working with streaming has been really cool. So what's your take on all that?
Yeah, the server components is also some very exciting feature for React 18. And surprisingly, Remix decided to not implement this for now, but maybe they will implement this later. But there are multiple models, and we don't know yet what is the best model. And I think it's only the beginning of server components with the introduction in Next.js. But I think both models are valuable, and it's nice that there is some kind of competition between returning some HTML and returning and having server components that allow you to call backend code very easily from your React components. And as you know, the maintainer of Docusaurus for Facebook, it's a static site generator. And I'm particularly excited by server components. And maybe it's not widely known, but it's actually possible to use server components on a static site generator. So we don't do this yet, but this is something I really want to implement as soon as possible, because it has huge value, I think, for a static site generator. The idea, for example, is that imagine you have a MDX file, the Markdown format with React components.
Yeah.
So this file, this is a bit weird, but it is not compiled to. It's compiled to a React component. So in the end, when you pass it to a Webpack loader that handles the MDX format, you get a React component in your code base. So this component becomes a real React component in your JS bundle. So this is quite annoying, because if you have a content-centric website like a documentation like Docusaurus, this code ends up being in your bundle, but it's also sent in your HTML, because we are a static site generator, so we render the React component, and then it's in the HTML and in the JavaScript. So somehow, when you load a page with MDX, you end up with twice the same content being loaded in two formats. So I think, this is one of the main benefits, I think, is because we don't want this to happen. We'd like to maybe just have the content in the static HTML and avoid it to being in the JS bundle, so that it permits to hydrate the React application faster, because it doesn't. We are also losing a lot of time hydrating the MDX component once the React application loads. So now imagine if you take this MDX component and make it a server component, you will end up with an application that will have much less JavaScript to load, and also the hydration time will be greatly reduced, because we don't have to hydrate all the static parts that are inside the MDX file. And how does it work with a static site generator? Basically, at build time, your Webpack is able, for example, to generate the MDX content as server components. So server components are serialized to a format that is normally sent from the server to the client through a runtime, an edge function or something, an Node.js Lambda or whatever. And as we are in a static site generator, we don't have a runtime. So we have to emit the static files with this format ahead of time. So as part of your static build, I think we will emit some .rsc files that apparently that's the extension that the React team decided on. I don't know if it's up to date, but I think I don't think it will change. But there is an extension that is planned to emit such React server component static files, and then for example, when you click on a link on your website, you will fetch the RSC file for the next page, and it will give you the serialized content of the React component to load, and then there is a runtime that permits to somehow render these server components on the front end, so that you can display the next blog post that you just clicked on. So it's a bit complicated. I'm not sure. Maybe
just a bit.
Yeah, maybe I lost you a bit, but I'm very excited by this, because this somehow, I work on Docusaurus, and I think a fair complaint is that maybe it's a bit overkill to use React and hydrate React on the front end for a content-centric website. maybe you can think Eleventy is better, Astro is better because it has Icelands and things like that. But I think server components will solve this because somehow we will be able to have somehow React Iceland on the front end thanks to server components, because we can skip all the static bits, and these static bits will stay on the server and we won't have to load them on the front end. So we will somehow catch up thanks to this feature and make the Docusaurus architecture more sustainable and more performant.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting stuff because I had no idea that your MDX components were actually coming through in your JavaScript bundles. When that kind of is a big deal because those MDX components and documentation sites can also be huge, right? It's sort of the nature of documentation sites. There's potentially a whole ton of content in there, so that can add up pretty quickly. But I think maybe we should, since you started talking about Docusaurus, maybe we could just transition to that. And maybe for our listeners that are just hearing that name for the first time, could you start by just giving an overview of like what Docusaurus is, what problem it's solving, why people might want to use it, that sort of thing?
Yeah. How it's different from some of the other static site options out there.
Yeah. So the main idea of Docusaurus is that you should be able to deploy a great documentation website by focusing just on your content. So basically, you can init a new Docusaurus project and just write Markdown files and tweak a bit some JSON config. And then you are able to deploy maybe in 5 minutes a website on GitHub Pages. You just have to run a Docusaurus deploy command, and then it's online. So we make it very easy to get started. In maybe 5 minutes, you have everything online. And it's easy also to adopt if you already have Markdown files on a GitHub repo or something. We build a quite generic. I mean, maybe you have seen a lot of Docusaurus websites, for example.
Oh, definitely.
React app, yeah. All of those React websites are mostly Docusaurus, apart maybe some using Next.js and things like that. But there are a lot of Docusaurus websites in the React ecosystem. So every time you see a React website that looks quite the same as another, it's likely to be Docusaurus somehow. So this is because those are somehow the default template that we provide at Docusaurus. So this is really easy to achieve that and get this kind of documentation website in a few minutes. But we also took care of giving you the right primitives to give you the ability to customize deeply your Docusaurus site. And you will encounter now many other more complex Docusaurus sites that are maybe you won't recognize that it's Docusaurus. And sometimes I go to a website and I ask myself, is it really Docusaurus? And I'm not sure. I have to open the DevTools to be sure. So we also have some great companies like Figma, Shopify, Microsoft, Snapchat, Ionic, Asura, and many more that are using Docusaurus, and they have customized it deeply so that the documentation website respects their branding. So they added a custom navigation, they added a custom footer, they added their colors and design system tokens and things like that. So the goal of Docusaurus is that you can get started fast and then you can customize and it scales somehow with your needs. And it will be much less expensive than building a custom solution using a more generic tool like Next.js or Gatsby. So that's the idea. But we also have some competitors. For example, if you're a Python developer, you may have heard of MKDocs, which is another quite interesting tool that Python developers tend to prefer because, of course, you prefer to use a tool of the language that you are familiar with because it permits you to extend it. And also, I think it's a great competitor. They have a really nice design. So there are also other competitors in the React ecosystem. For example, there is Nextra, which is a Next.js plugin. I think it's quite advanced and polished now. I think there is the version 2 that was released quite recently, or maybe will be released. I don't know. I think Docusaurus offer more features now, but maybe they will catch up. I don't know. I didn't do a deep comparison recently. And there are also similar tools in the Vue ecosystem. For example, there is VuePress and VidPress that permits to do about similar things. And Astro also has a docs template, but it's more like a boilerplate. So if they add new features to their tool and then you initialized your project maybe the year before, you won't benefit from the new features. While the goal of Docusaurus is that when we add new features, you should be able to upgrade your NPM package and being able to benefit from these features without having to backport the features. So it's a bit like Create React App, but for documentation somehow.
Yeah, I hate when people do that kind of, you create your boilerplate project and then you're sort of stuck because the platform is basically kind of across, the versions or whatever, and they don't retain version compatibility. Ugh.
Yeah, but at the same time, it gives you flexibility to implement things that otherwise, for example, Create React App. When you use that tool, soon you reach the limit, and then you have to use a tool like Krakow or something like that permits to override the default configuration. But I think it's still better because at least you have the basis being provided by a dependency, but then you have some tools that permits you to enhance it from the outside. And somehow, so if I were to compare Docusaurus with Create React App, it's a bit like we provide both Create React App and Krakow in the same package. Somehow, we give you the primitives of how to override the frameworks. For example, any temp component, you can override anything. You just have to put a component override that we call this swizzle, where you somehow copy-paste a component of our theme and you put it in a folder in your documentation website, and you can override everything you want about this component. So this gives you great flexibility, but at the same time, it's also a bit dangerous because if we want to rename someday the component and the theme, you will have to take this into consideration, and maybe when you upgrade, some things will break a bit. So it can be annoying too. So that's life.
As long as it's a major release, it's fine.
Yeah.
People kind of expect a little bit of breakage.
Yeah.
Without breakage, you don't get any cool features.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hey there, this is Charles Maxwood. I'm excited because I wanted to let you know about this thing that I pulled together that I've been dying to have this for years, and I never felt like I could. And then I just realized that there's no reason why I can't. So I'm putting together a book club, and we're going to read development-focused books, career books, technical books, whatever. The first book that we're going to do is going to be Clean Architecture by Uncle Bob Martin. If you're not familiar with Clean Code or some of the other stuff that Bob has done, check that out. I've also talked to him on the Clean Coders podcast, which is on Top End Devs. But we're going to get on. He's going to show up to some of our meetings. And what I'm thinking is we'll probably have like 5 or 6 people part of the conversation along with Bob and I at the same time. And we'll just, so somebody can come on, they can ask their question, and then we'll just rotate people through. So we'll mute one person, unmute another person when it's their turn to come on and be part of the discussion. So we'll do that for like an hour and a half. And then the other part of it that I'm putting together is just kind of a meet and greet gather area on GatherTown. And so after the meetup and the call, what we'll do is we'll all go over to GatherTown, and you can just log in, walk up to a group and have a conversation. And that way we can all kind of get to know each other and make friends and get to know people across the world. One thing that I'm finding is that, the meetups are starting to come back, but a lot of people don't have the opportunity to go to a meetup. And I really want to meet you guys and talk to you. So we're going to put all that together. It'll all be part of that book club. You can go to topenddevs.com/book club to be part of it. And I'm looking forward to seeing you there. The first book club meeting will be in December, the beginning of December. We're starting the first week of December. And you'll also be part of the conversation about which book we do next. I have one in mind, but I want to see where everybody's at. So there you go.
No, this is really cool. I've just been perusing the website because I've I've been involved in some capacity with lots of documentation sites in the past. And usually they all end up being some degree of custom thing that it's weird because building a documentation site seems like it would not be that hard. And it really isn't that. Right. And in a sense, it really isn't that hard. But then once you get into it, it's like as soon as a requirement comes up, like, oh, we need versions of this or support versioning. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, you have to fundamentally rethink everything you've done. Like, crap, how are we going to support this? Like, how, there are different languages or those are the things that always just fundamentally just could knock you back quite a bit.
Yeah, that's also what I thought before working on Docusaurus. I started maybe 2.5 years ago. And before that, I never built any documentation website. So I discovered the field about at the same time I started working on the project. And yeah, this is quite crazy because, for example, for Docusaurus, we care about things like SEO, accessibility, and things like that. We try, for example, there's no week that I don't spend time trying to improve the accessibility of the site so that someone that is using a voiceover or something like that will be able to browse the website. I spend all the time for example, just 2 hours ago, I merged the pull request that permits to improve the RSS feed of your blog. This is the little details that you don't think about when you have never built a documentation website, but eventually you will have to think about all these little details that you somehow overlook before you work on this.
Mm-hmm.
Search as well. I see like search is a big feature of this. Do you want to talk a little bit about how search works in Docusaurus?
Yeah, if you want, we have a partnership with Algolia. They have a program called Doc Search, and somehow if you build an open source website, a project that is eligible for a free account on Doc Search, like an open source project, they will run a crawler on your website for you. Maybe once every day or something like that. I think you can configure the period. Docusaurus puts some metadata in the static HTML files that we build, and the crawler run on all the pages. And then the search engine is available as an API, and we have an integration that permits to automatically add a search input on your Docusaurus site. So we just query the Algolia API and that works quite easily. And some people don't like to use a third-party SaaS service like Algolia, and sometimes they don't want to pay because they have to pay if they are not eligible. So we have some community plugins to permit to use local search plugins. There's no official local search plugin for now, but there is a plan to build one. I think the ones in the community are quite good enough for now, but I know that people want the official plugin. They don't like to use something that is not official, so we will have to provide one someday.
Yeah, I'm going to get up on my soapbox for a second because I've got a bunch of folks coming to me with like open source projects that they've made, and they're like, "Hey, can you talk about this?" And I think the idea is that they just want to get out there, and they figure that if they get a tech influencer or if they get on This Week in React, it's just going to blow up and everything's going to be great. But you really need to work on documentation and examples, and having something like Docusaurus, like doing that so that it's done in a standardized way allows your community members to come in and very easily add to your documentation and help you make a better documentation site if that's not your thing. But I gotta say, like, when you think about like open sourcing stuff, think about the effort level of coding and then multiply that by 10. That should be the amount of documentation that because it's really about teaching people how to use your thing.
Yeah.
Really,
I really agree with that, and I think actually it's a problem for many developers. They don't invest at all in documentation, but also marketing. Somehow, they build a nice project, but there is just a GitHub repository with maybe 5 lines saying, "Yeah, this is the
this is a thing. You're supposed to use it. What more do you want me to say about it? Like, what? What does it do?
Read the code source to understand what's the point of the project.
Oh, gosh.
And listen, hey, I'm cool with reading code. I like reading code, but give me an entry point that's easier than that for sure.
Yeah. So one question that I have about using Docusaurus is you said that companies or whoever is really able to customize it to match their colors and their branding and things like that. What are the different ways that you can do that? Like, can you use Sass? Can you use Tailwind? Is it possible to use all different sorts of CSS and JS?
So the idea is that the simple way to start customizing Docusaurus is probably to change the color so that it matches your brand. You can just create some new CSS file that you register through the config, and then we have some CSS variables that represent the design tokens, for example, the colors and font size and things like that. So you can provide this through a CSS file. And then by default, we use CSS modules, but there's a Sass CSS module plugin, I think, that permits to use Sass if that's your thing. And for more advanced use case, sometimes CSS is not good enough. So we provide some stable class names that you can target if you want through CSS file, but we don't do break-in change on. But there are also many things that you may want to target for which we don't have stable selectors because we have to give to keep the flexibility to be able to refactor things sometimes. So we can guarantee that no selector will ever break. Of course, it's a bit a bit complicated to do that. But if you want to do deeper customization, sometimes you have to also be able to change the markup. So this is what the Swizzle feature permits you to override any temp component. So in this case, you are able to somehow get a copy of the React component that we use internally and tweak it like you want, including its CSS module file. So you can change the CSS module of this component or the React implementation and add your own behavior if you want. And there's also a mod which permits you to wrap an existing temp component with extra components around it. And I think it's useful because it permits, for example, if you have a blog, for example, and you have an article and you want to plug in your own comment system, or maybe you want to allow users to vote for documentation, to provide feedback, say thumbs up or down if the documentation is great. You can do this thanks to a wrapper. For example, you wrap the blog post, you create a component that renders the original blog post, and in addition, put at the bottom the comment widget. So you don't have to create a copy of the full blog post code, and it permits to reduce the maintenance on your side and the likelihood of having things to break if you upgrade Docusaurus and we did some internal change to the same component that you try to customize. So somehow it permits to put a component above or under an existing component that we already render in the React tree. And I think it's the pattern to use in priority, because if you copy our internal code and then we modify it, there is a risk that your copy will become stale over time. And it happens quite often that users forget to upgrade this code, and they wonder after why this Docusaurus new feature is not available just to them, because of course they are on a version that they copied like 1 year ago. So the thing is now outdated, and they don't benefit from the new features. So I think that's all. And just the ability to override all the React components should give you a good way to do whatever you want. It's not always easy because we have some opinions that if you want a totally different layout and totally different features than the Docusaurus default template, maybe it's better that you start from scratch. But I think we provide some good structure to get started and build little customizations there. And there are a lot of nice websites that are using Docusaurus and have nice customizations, and they say it's working great for them. So hopefully you should be able to do the same.
Yeah, I love Docusaurus sites, honestly. I mean, and I've seen so many of them, which is the proof that it's a solid product.
Mm-hmm.
Why rebuild it? Just use it.
I think that we have some drawbacks still. For example, we are a small team, and it's quite hard to compete, for example, with Next.js and Vercel on the infrastructure. I don't do Rust, and this is the trend these days. And so, if you compare build times and things like that with Rust tools, of course, it's we are still using Webpack and Babel and things like that by default. So we are not the fastest static site generator.
Actually, I was surprised until today. I didn't know Docusaurus was a Facebook/Meta project.
Yeah,
I actually had no idea. So is the motivation behind that just because I noticed like a lot of Facebook tools use it, like you said, like a lot of the React stuff. Was that sort of the motivation to build this and to support it? Because I mean, it is like I'm still always fascinated by big companies giving away stuff like this for free and maintaining it, because there's definitely some effort and involvement to make that happen.
Yeah, I can tell you a bit about the story behind the project, but I was not there in the beginning. Maybe I think it was like 6 years ago. So the Facebook Meta had a lot of internal and external projects. You only maybe see the tip of the iceberg. I'm not an employee at Meta. I am a contractor working for them. So I can tell you exactly how it works internally. But I know they have a lot of internal projects, and they also have projects that are external, but there is a part of internal documentation that you don't see. For example, if you take the Relay project, the GraphQL client, there is some documentation that is public, but they also build Docusaurus site with some extra documentation pages that are just targeting the Facebook employees. So they need to be able to do such things and publish two variants of the same site so that different persons can browse the website. So they have a lot of internal and external projects, and they started to copy paste a Jekyll template over and over again to create documentation websites for each of them. But the thing is, it wasn't very scalable because for the same reason that boilerplate is not ideal, once you add new features to the boilerplate, then all the products that used it before will not benefit from it. And so it becomes a pain to maintain. And then they had the idea to create a reg-based static site generator. Maybe 6 years ago, I think Docusaurus was released at that time. And so the first version of Docusaurus was quite different. It was only using React on the client side, and it was not hydrating React on the front end. And somehow it was just a quite monolithic architecture where you run a click command and you provide it a folder full of Markdown files, and it will build a basic static website with just with no React. So you never load React on your browser. And somehow it was quite successful, and there are many projects that adopted it. For example, today there is still Babel, Prettier, and LaTeX, I think, that are still using Docusaurus, and a few other projects too. And so they wanted a new version of the tool, and so we started working on Docusaurus 2 maybe 4 years ago. And this time we are really leveraging React on the front end. So we hydrate React and we make a lot of interactive content, and we are using MDX to make your doc interactive by embedding React components inside the markup so that you can have some nice playful documentation somehow. I think it's quite cool. And you can build many interesting things thanks to this kind of feature. Like maybe you can add a GraphQL client that permits to query your API directly inside the doc. There are a lot of things. I think users can get quite fancy, and sometimes I'm quite surprised by what people build with this. But yeah, you don't have any limit because you are using React. Whatever you can do with React, you should be able to embed in your documentation.
Nice.
Yeah, I really love it when they have those examples of the API. You can just run right there and get the output. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I like is that it's not an iframe. So, there is not a spinner that is showing something that is loading and producing layout shifts as you scroll. And it's nice that you have the thing that is running directly on your browser in the current page, and not embedded in an iframe that takes time to load and produce a not ideal experience, I think.
Yeah. Well, this has been an awesome conversation, and I wish we could go on forever with this. Are there any topics that we haven't kind of touched on that you might want to touch on before we finish up?
Oh, there are a lot of topics I can talk about with React, but this is going to be too long. I think I'm quite passionate about everything cross-platform, React Native. I'm into Remotion to produce videos with React, and I'm into React Free Fiber to render things in 3D. And actually, I'm into both of them at the same time. So I think if money was not a problem, I could spend all my time on one project that would be to render 3D videos with Remotion and React Free Fiber at the same time, and do really fancy things like create a Twitter bot that permits to congratulate open source authors to reach a milestone or something like that with a beautiful video. This is a quite fun project I'd like to build. But
you heard it here first. Dune 2 will be rendered in Remotion. It's going to be great.
I want to hear about your newsletter, and you should give it a plug as well. Do you want to just at least briefly tell people about what it is and why they might want to sign up for it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I run This Week in React. It's a weekly newsletter that I started in French maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And I launched it in English last year. And it's growing fast. And I send you somehow the best links of the React ecosystem every week so that you can stay up to date. And I think it's a bit different from other newsletters is that I really take care of selecting the links that will be interesting for experienced developer and not only for junior developers. Like I try to avoid putting things like getting started in React and things that you find on many blogs like Dev and things like that where there are too much junior related content. And the problem I'm trying to solve somehow is, as an experienced React developer, it's hard to find articles that are interesting to me. And it takes a lot of time. You have to spend a lot of time scrolling on Twitter to find the really interesting content that teach you something new, So I try to solve this problem for React developers, and apparently I do a good job because people give me great feedback on the newsletter. So
yeah, it's great. It's
Nice.
awesome. Well done.
Thank you.
thisweekinreact.com, and we'll put the same in the show notes as well.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Have you ever wished that you had a group of people that were just as passionate about writing code as you are? I know I did. I did that for most of my career. I'd go to the meetups. I'd try and create other opportunities, and it was just really hard, right? The meetups, I got some of that, but they were only like once or twice a month, and it was just really hard to find that group of people that I connected with and really wanted to, talk about code a lot, right? I mean, I love writing code. I think it's the best. And so I've decided to create this community and create it a worldwide community that we can all jump in and do it. So we're going to have 2 workshops every week. One of those or 2 of those every month are going to be Q&A calls, right? Where you can get on, you can ask me or me and another expert questions. The rest of them are going to be focused on different aspects of career or programming or things like that, right? So it'll go anywhere from like deployments and containers all the way up to managing your 401k and negotiating your benefits package. We'll cover all of it, okay? And then we're also going to have meetups every month for your particular technology area. So we have shows about JavaScript, React, Angular, Vue, and so on. We're going to have meetups for all of those things. I'm going to revive the freelancer show. We'll have one about that, right? So you can get started freelancing or continue freelancing if that's where you're at. And I'm working on finding authors who can actually do weekly video tutorials on something for 10 minutes that's related to, again, to those technology areas so that you can stay current and keep growing. So if you're interested, go to topenddevs.com/sign up, and you can get in right now for $39. When we're done, that price is going to go up to $75. And the $39 price gets you access to 2 calls per week. The full price at $150, which is going to be $75 over the next few weeks, that price is going to get you access to all of the calls and all of the tutorials and everything else that we put out from Top End Devs, along with member pricing for our remote conferences that are coming up next year. So go check it out, topenddevs.com/sign up.
Well, that brings us around to picks for the week. So Paige, why don't you start us off with your pick for the week?
Sure. So if you're in the U.S. or you celebrate the U.S. holidays, last week was Thanksgiving. So it's typically a time when you go visit family, you hang out, you watch TV a lot or movies.
And overeat.
And one very fun series that we were watching that, you can just pick up an episode and watch it is Top Gear. So it's a British car show, but it's fun because there's supercars, there's challenges where they have to buy a car within a certain amount of, some little amount of money. They do crazy things like rallying and driving around the country and pranking each other all at the same time. So that was what we were watching a good bit of last week. So I'm going to pick that as a really fun, family-friendly, everybody will enjoy it of all ages, even if you're not a car person, because there's a lot more to it than just cars. So if you have some time and you want something that's easy and light, I would definitely say that's a good one to choose.
Absolutely. TJ, you want to give us a pick?
Sure. Well, your Thanksgiving message made me pivot mine because I came up with another idea. Because
you were going to do Top Gear too?
No, not Top Gear, but I mean, longtime listeners know that we like picking kitchen gadgets and cooking gadgets on the show. And so I'm going to pick an electric wine bottle opener that we've had for a while. And you might think, why do I need an electric wine bottle opener? Because really, at the end of the day, you don't need one of these things.
You do.
The only reason to do it is it's an amazing party trick to just like have a wine bottle and to bust open this thing. Because basically it's got a corkscrew in it, but there's just a button that pushes down for the corkscrew, goes in. If you press the other button, it comes right out. It makes opening a wine bottle really easy. You can impress friends and family. They're like $25 too, so it's not like it's ludicrously expensive.
Which one though?
I found one on Amazon, Oster, Oster.
Oh yeah,
that's one. It's one we have. It's just a lot of fun. I don't know.
Yeah,
silly little thing, but you can impress your friends and look cool. Who doesn't want to do that?
They have to have a requirement when they're building that thing. How inebriated can you be and still
use it?
Hit the button? You know. All right, Sebastien, what's your pick for the week?
Actually, I already mentioned my pick. It was Remotion and React Free Fiber.
Oh.
So I think it's really a great combination that I'd like to explore more in the future. And maybe there is also React Native Skia that I want to mention, which permits to do 2D graphics on the browser. And combined with Remotion, it also permits to do some crazy videos. And this is what maybe you know the William Candillon YouTuber that creates a video about React Native animations. And he's using Remotion and Skia to produce his videos. And I think it gives a really great result.
Can you spell that last one for me? Not Remotion, but it's did you say Skia?
Yeah, Skia. This is the rendering engine of Flutter. And it's used on there is a new package from Shopify that's called React Native Skia, but actually this is also working on the web because most things working on React Native can usually work on the web. So you can use React Native Skia, but somehow maybe it should be better renamed as React Skia because you can use it on both React Native or React Web. So this is also a cool package to try. But it's a bit new, so maybe it's not stable enough for production usage on the web, but it's worth taking a look.
And their documentation uses Docusaurus, so
dun, dun, dun. It's all coming back around.
Yeah,
nice. All right. Well, let's see. I'll wrap up with my pick for the week. My pick for the week is Console Ninja. I don't know if I've talked about it before, but it is from the same folks that do Wallaby and Quokka. Wallaby is a unit test helper. Quokka is a worksheet extension for VS Code where you can create a workbook and then just kind of in TypeScript or JavaScript just start going at it and see, what does this regular expression cook up, that kind of thing. It's very handy. Both of those are, I know Wallaby pretty much have to pay for. Quokka, I think, is a free version and a pay-for version. But this new one, Console Ninja, is completely free. And it actually gives you the console log right there in the code. Even if it's rendering on the browser, well, it could be rendering in Node as well on the server. And it's just like, oh, man. And it's just so easy. And another thing it does is, even if it wasn't a console log, if you have an error thrown somewhere in your execution path, you actually see the error. And that's, I think, even more convenient is it's like right there, in a big red, like, hey, you're referencing an undefined dummy, go fix that. And it's been super handy. So big fan of Console Ninja.
Nice. All
right, guys. Well, this has been really, really fun. And Sebastien, how do we keep up with you besides This Week in React?
You can find me on Twitter at Sebastien Lorber, This Week in React.
Awesome.
I think, there are a lot of links on the newsletter, so you will find me.
Awesome. Well, it's been a lot of pleasure, and we will see you guys next week.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
See you
Thank
then.
you.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.